My stepfather claims I'm not real family, so my mother's house should go to his kids instead. Hi everyone! Today's story will blow your mind, but really quick, if you enjoy this content, hit that subscribe button. Channel's been a bit quiet lately, and your support keeps it all going. Let's jump in. I never thought I'd be writing something like this, but here I am at 28, sitting in my childhood bedroom, trying to make sense of how family definitions suddenly became weapons. My name is Michael, and until 6 months ago, I thought I understood what family meant. My mother passed away from cancer 8 months ago, and since then, my stepfather Richard has systematically tried to erase my existence from what I've always called home. Let me give you the background. My biological father died in a car accident when I was 3. I have no memories of him, just some photographs and stories my mother used to tell. When I was 7, my mother married Richard. He already had 2 kids from his previous marriage, Brian, who was 9 at the time, and Jennifer, who was 6. They visited every other weekend, while I lived there full-time with my mother. Richard was never cruel or abusive. He was just distant. He'd attend my school events if my mother insisted, sign permission slips when needed, and occasionally throw a baseball with me in the backyard. But there was always this invisible wall between us. When Brian and Jennifer visited, that wall became transparent. I could see the warmth he reserved for them, the easy laughter, the inside jokes I was never part of. My mother tried to bridge that gap for years. She'd organize family activities, insist on family photos where Richard would put his hand on my shoulder with all the warmth of someone posing with a cardboard cutout. She'd gently remind him about my basketball games or science fair projects. He'd show up, but I could always sense he was counting down the minutes until he could leave. The house we lived in belonged to my mother before she married Richard. She inherited it from her parents, my grandparents, who specifically wanted it to stay in the family. It's a modest 3-bedroom colonial in a good school district, nothing fancy, but it's been home to our family for 3 generations. My mother never added Richard's name to the deed, something that seemed to bother him more as the years went on. When my mother got sick 2 years ago, things shifted. Richard stepped up in ways I hadn't expected. He drove her to chemotherapy appointments, managed her medications, held her hand through the worst of it. For the first time in 21 years, I thought maybe we were finally becoming a real family. I moved back home to help with her care, taking a remote position with my company to be there full-time. Those last months were simultaneously the hardest and most meaningful of my life. My mother and I would talk for hours when she felt well enough. She told me stories about my father I'd never heard, shared her hopes for my future, and made me promise to take care of the house. "This is your home, Michael," she said one afternoon, gripping my hand with surprising strength. "It's been in our family for 60 years. Promise me you'll keep it that way." She updated her will a month before she died, with her lawyer present and everything properly documented. The house went to me, along with her personal belongings and half of her savings. The other half went to Richard, plus her life insurance policy. It seemed fair. Richard would have enough to start over comfortably, and I would have the family home. The funeral was a blur. Richard seemed genuinely devastated, and for a moment, I felt like we were united in our grief. Brian and Jennifer flew in for the service. They were polite but distant, as always. After everyone left, Richard and I sat in the living room in silence. "She loved this house," he finally said. I nodded, unable to trust my voice. That was the last civil conversation we had. Main development. 3 weeks after the funeral, Richard asked to speak with me. I was in my mother's study, going through old photo albums, trying to hold on to memories that already felt like they were slipping away. He knocked on the doorframe, something he'd never done before. My mother's space had always been sacred, and even now, he seemed reluctant to cross the threshold. "We need to discuss the house situation," he said, settling into the chair across from me with the air of someone about to conduct a business meeting. I set down the album carefully. "What situation?" "Mom's will was clear." Richard's jaw tightened. "Your mother wasn't thinking clearly at the end. The medications, the pain, she wasn't herself." "She was completely lucid when she updated her will," I said, feeling heat rise in my chest. "Her lawyer can attest to that." "I'm not questioning her mental capacity," Richard said, though his tone suggested otherwise. "I'm questioning whether she fully considered the implications. This house should stay in the real family." The words hung in the air between us like a slap. "I'm sorry, the real family?" Richard leaned forward, his hands clasped together like he was about to explain something to a child. "Michael, you know I've tried to be a father to you. But the fact remains that you're not my biological son. Brian and Jennifer, they're my actual children. They deserve their father's assets." "This isn't your asset," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "This house belonged to my mother, and before her, my grandparents. You never contributed a dime to the mortgage, never paid for any major repairs. Mom kept everything in her name for a reason. I lived here for 21 years, Richard's voice rose. I maintained this property, paid utilities, bought groceries. That counts for something. You lived here rent-free for 21 years while my mother paid the mortgage from her inheritance and salary, I countered. You benefited from this arrangement far more than you contributed. Richard stood abruptly, his face flushing. This is exactly why Margaret should have thought more carefully. You're not considering the family dynamics here. Brian and Jennifer grew up visiting this house. They have memories here too. Every other weekend, I said quietly. They visited every other weekend. I lived here every single day. Because their mother had primary custody. Richard snapped. That wasn't my choice. But blood is blood, Michael. You can't deny that they're my legitimate heirs. The word legitimate felt like a knife. As opposed to what? Your illegitimate stepson. Richard had the grace to look slightly ashamed. That's not what I meant. Then what did you mean? He sighed, running his hand through his thinning hair. Look, I'm trying to be reasonable here. The will gives you the house, fine. But morally, ethically, don't you think my children deserve something from the place their father called home for 2 decades? They're getting something, I reminded him. Half of Mom's savings and her life insurance. That's more than fair considering they spent maybe 30 days a year here. It's not about the money, Richard insisted. It's about family legacy. This house should go to real family members who can pass it on to their children. You're not even married. What happens to this place when you die? It leaves the family entirely. It stays in my family, I said firmly. My mother's family. My grandparents' family. The family that actually owns it. Richard's mask of reasonableness finally slipped. Your mother is dead, Michael. Your grandparents are dead. Without me, you have no family. You're just a lone branch on a dying tree. My children can continue the family legacy. Your children who've shown zero interest in this house beyond wondering what it's worth. I stood up, matching his stance. Jennifer asked me at the funeral reception if I planned to sell quickly or wait for the market to improve. That's your family legacy. At least they understand the value of property, Richard shot back. You're being selfish, holding onto a house too big for one person just because of sentiment. It's not sentiment, I said. It's my home. It's been my home since I was born. You moved into our lives, Richard, not the other way around. Richard stepped closer, his voice dropping to something almost menacing. I raised you for 21 years. I paid for your food, your clothes, your school supplies. Don't you think that earns me some say in what happens to the property I helped maintain? You want to itemize every pizza you bought me? Every school field trip you paid for? I laughed bitterly. Should I calculate what room and board would have cost you for 2 decades? Because I guarantee you came out ahead. This is exactly what Margaret was afraid of, Richard said, shaking his head. She knew you'd turn bitter and selfish without her here to mediate. She told me to watch out for this. Don't you dare, I said, my voice deadly quiet. Don't you dare use my mother's memory to manipulate me. She left me this house because she wanted me to have it. She was very clear about that. She was trying to compensate for your father's death, Richard said. She felt guilty that you grew up without a real father, so she overcompensated by leaving you everything. You were supposed to be my real father, I said, and hated how young I sounded. For 21 years, you were supposed to be my father. But you never let me forget I wasn't really yours, did you? Richard's face went through several expressions before settling on cold determination. I tried, Michael. God knows I tried. But you can't force these things. Biology matters. Brian and Jennifer are my blood. They deserve their inheritance. Then leave them your inheritance, I said. This isn't yours to give. Update 1. It's been 3 weeks since that conversation, and things have escalated in ways I never imagined. I thought Richard would accept the legal reality and move on. Instead, he's launched what can only be described as a campaign to turn everyone against me. It started small. I overheard him on the phone with Brian, saying things like squatters' rights and unfair influence. Then Jennifer called me, her voice sweet as syrup, suggesting we could work out an arrangement where I'd sell the house and split the proceeds 3 ways. When I declined, she hung up on me. But the real shock came yesterday. I was getting the mail when our neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, who's lived next door for 40 years, stopped me. She's known me literally since the day I was born, used to babysit me when I was little. Michael dear, she said, her face full of concern. I had no idea things were so difficult between you and Richard. I frowned. What do you mean? She shifted uncomfortably. He told me and several others at the neighborhood association meeting that you're trying to force him out of his home. He said that stepchildren always cause problems when there's an inheritance involved, and that real children would be more grateful for everything he's done. I felt like I'd been punched. He said what? Mrs. Patterson looked genuinely distressed. He made it sound like you'd changed the locks already, that you were throwing him out without any notice. Several people were quite shocked. Mrs. Henderson suggested maybe you needed grief counseling. Mrs. Patterson, I said carefully, Richard has no legal claim to this house. It belonged to my mother before they married, and she left it to me. I haven't changed any locks or asked him to leave immediately. I told him he could take time to find a new place. Her face shifted from concern to confusion. But he said, he made it sound like this was his house, that your mother had promised it to his children. I pulled out my phone and showed her a photo of the deed. Look at the date. My mother owned this house 5 years before she even met Richard. He never paid the mortgage, never put his name on it. My grandparents bought this house in 1963. It's been in my family for 3 generations. Mrs. Patterson's expression hardened. That man stood in front of 30 neighbors and lied? What else did he say? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. She pressed her lips together. He said that biology doesn't lie, that his real children had more right to inherit than a stepchild. He actually used the phrase, blood is thicker than water, several times. It was uncomfortable. Several of us remember when your mother married him, how happy she was to give you a father figure. Did anyone defend me? Mr. Chen asked why Richard hadn't put his name on the house during a 21-year marriage if it was so important to him, Mrs. Patterson said. Richard claimed your mother had promised to add him but never got around to it. Then he started crying, saying he missed your mother and just wanted to preserve her memory for his biological children. The manipulation was breathtaking. Richard had lived in this neighborhood for 2 decades but had never bothered to form real relationships with anyone. Now suddenly he was attending meetings, playing the grieving widower card. Thank you for telling me, I said. And for asking my side. She patted my arm. I've known you since you were in diapers, Michael. Your mother would be appalled by this behavior. Do you need anything? Just spread the truth if you hear more lies, I said. I went back inside to find Richard in the kitchen, calmly making coffee like he hadn't just tried to destroy my reputation with people I'd known my entire life. Productive neighborhood meeting? I asked. He didn't even have the decency to look embarrassed. Just sharing my situation with concerned friends. Your situation? I laughed incredulously. You mean the situation where you're trying to steal a house that never belonged to you? Steal is a strong word, Richard said, sipping his coffee. I prefer claim what's morally mine. There's nothing moral about lying to our neighbors. He shrugged. I told them the truth as I see it. You're a stepchild trying to push out your grieving stepfather. Real children, biological children, would show more gratitude and respect. Respect. I slammed my hand on the counter, making him jump. You want to talk about respect? How about respecting my mother's wishes? How about respecting the fact that I'm her son, regardless of biology? You're her son, Richard agreed. But you're not my son. Never were, never will be. And since this house represents 21 years of my life, my real children deserve consideration. Then you should have married someone who owned nothing, I said. You chose to marry a woman with assets and never secured your claim to them. That's on you. Update 2. The psychological warfare continued for another 2 weeks. Richard started making plans with Brian and Jennifer, discussing renovations to their house loud enough for me to hear. He'd walk through rooms talking about which child would get which bedroom, how they'd update the kitchen, maybe add a pool in the backyard. Then came the letters. Official-looking envelopes started arriving, all addressed to Richard. He'd opened them dramatically at the kitchen table, sighing heavily. When I finally grabbed one, I saw they were from a law firm, consultations about contesting the will. You're wasting your money, I told him. The will is ironclad. We'll see, he said cryptically. Brian started showing up more frequently, measuring rooms, taking photos. He completely ignored me, acting like I was already gone. Jennifer came by with paint samples, holding them up against walls while discussing color schemes with Richard. The breaking point came when I found them in my mother's study, going through her papers. What are you doing? I demanded. Jennifer looked up innocently. Just looking for any documentation about Dad's contributions to the house. Receipts for repairs, utility bills, anything that shows his investment. Get out, I said. Get out of her study right now. It's not her study anymore, Brian said coldly. She's dead. This is just a room in our father's house. This is a room in my house, I corrected. And you're trespassing. Richard appeared in the doorway. They're my children, Michael. They have a right to visit their father. Not in my mother's study, they don't. This room is off-limits. You can't restrict my movements in my own home, Richard said. This isn't your home, I shouted. It's never been your home. You were a guest here for 21 years, and now your invitation has expired. Richard smiled coldly. We'll see what the courts say about that. That night, I installed a lock on my mother's study door. The next morning, Richard had called a locksmith to remove it. You have no right to restrict access to any room in this house, he informed me. I have every right, I said. I own this house. Possession is 9/10 of the law, he replied. And I'm in possession. Update 3. I consulted a lawyer the next day. Patricia Hernandez came highly recommended and didn't mince words after reviewing the documentation. Legally, you're in the clear, she said. The will is valid, properly executed, and unambiguous. Richard has no claim to the property. However, evicting someone who's lived somewhere for 21 years can be complicated. Has he been receiving mail there? Yes, I admitted. Then he's established residency. You'll need to give him formal notice, typically 30 days. If he doesn't leave voluntarily, you'll need to go through eviction proceedings. How long could that take? If he fights it? Months. Maybe longer if he claims some sort of equitable interest based on his long residency and contributions to maintenance. I felt sick. So he can just squat in my house? Not indefinitely, Patricia assured me. But he can make it difficult and expensive. My advice: document everything. Every conversation, every incident. Install security cameras in common areas. And whatever you do, don't change the locks or shut off utilities. That could be construed as an illegal eviction. I took her advice. I installed cameras in the hallways, living room, and kitchen, all common areas where I had the right to monitor my own property. Richard was furious. You're spying on me. I'm protecting my property, I corrected, and documenting any damage or theft. The cameras proved invaluable. I captured Brian attempting to remove a valuable painting my grandmother had left me, claiming Richard had promised it to him. I recorded Jennifer going through my mother's jewelry box, pocketing several pieces before I confronted her. These are family heirlooms, she said defensively. They should go to real family. I am real family, I said, taking back my grandmother's pearl necklace. And if I catch you stealing again, I'll press charges. She stormed out, but not before the camera caught her keying my car on the way to hers. Update 4. Things reached a crescendo 3 weeks later. I came home from a grocery run to find the locks had been changed. My key wouldn't work. Richard's car was in the driveway, along with Brian's truck and Jennifer's sedan. I called the police immediately. He locked me out of my own house, I explained to the dispatcher. I have the deed, the will, everything proving it's mine. 2 officers arrived within 20 minutes. Richard answered the door like he owned the place. Officers, he said smoothly. This is a family dispute. My stepson and I are having a disagreement about living arrangements. Sir, I interrupted, showing them my documentation. This is my house. He has no legal right to change the locks. The officers reviewed my papers, then turned to Richard. Sir, you need to let him in. This is his property. I've lived here for 21 years, Richard protested. I have tenant rights. You may have residency rights, one officer agreed, but you can't lock the owner out. Open the door now, or we'll arrest you for unlawful eviction. Richard reluctantly let me in. The house was full of boxes. Brian and Jennifer had been moving their things in. They're staying with me temporarily, Richard claimed. I have the right to have guests. Not anymore, I said. I handed him the formal eviction notice Patricia had prepared. You have 30 days to vacate the premises. All of you. Richard's face went purple. You ungrateful little bastard. After everything I've done for you. What exactly have you done for me? I asked. Besides try to steal my inheritance and turn the neighborhood against me? I raised you, he shouted. I gave you a father when yours was too stupid to avoid a drunk driver. The officers stepped between us. Sir, that's enough. You've been served notice. I suggest you start making arrangements. After they left, I found Brian and Jennifer in my bedroom, trying to move my things out. This is the master bedroom, Jennifer said. It should go to Dad. Get out of my room, I said quietly. Get out now, or I call the police back and press charges for trespassing. They left, but not before Brian muttered, You're not even real family. You're just some kid Mom felt sorry for. Update 5. The next 30 days were hell. Richard filed a claim in court, arguing he had an equitable interest in the property due to his long residency and contributions. His lawyer argued that my mother had made verbal promises about the house that superseded the written will. Patricia was prepared. We had years of financial records showing my mother paid all housing expenses from her personal accounts. We had the original deed, the will, and affidavits from neighbors confirming my mother's clear intentions. Richard's case fell apart when he couldn't produce a single document showing financial contribution to the mortgage or major repairs. His evidence consisted of grocery receipts and utility bills, normal household expenses that any tenant would pay. The judge was unsympathetic. Mr. Richard, you lived rent-free in a home owned by your wife for over 2 decades. You received a substantial cash inheritance and life insurance payout. The will is clear and valid. You have no claim to this property. But Richard wasn't done. 2 days before the eviction deadline, I woke up to noises downstairs. I grabbed my phone, ready to call 911, and crept to the landing. The security camera footage later showed everything clearly. Richard was in the living room with Brian and Jennifer, loading electronics into boxes. They were taking the TV, the sound system, even trying to disconnect the mounted speakers. That's theft, I said from the stairs. They froze. Richard straightened up, trying to look dignified. These are items I purchased. I'm taking what's mine. The TV was my mother's. I have the receipt in her files. Put it back. Prove it, Brian challenged. I held up my phone. It's all on camera. Put everything back, or I call the police right now. They reluctantly returned the items, but not before Jennifer made one last attempt at manipulation. Michael, please, she said, tears appearing on cue. This is our childhood home too. We have memories here. Doesn't that count for anything? Your memories consist of complaining about having to visit every other weekend, I reminded her. You spent your time here asking when you could go back to your mom's house. That's not fair, she protested. We were kids. We didn't understand the dynamics. You understood enough to know I wasn't real family, I said. You and Brian made that clear every visit. Remember the Christmas you told me I shouldn't get equal presents because I wasn't really Richard's son? She had the grace to look ashamed. We were young. You were teenagers, I corrected. Old enough to know better. And now you're adults, still playing the same games. Resolution. On the final day, Richard made one last stand. He gathered more neighbors, spinning a tale of being thrown out by an ungrateful stepson after decades of faithful parenting. But Mrs. Patterson had done her work well. Most neighbors knew the truth by then. Mr. Chen actually confronted him. Richard, we all know Michael's mother owned this house before you came along. Stop trying to steal from her son. As the moving truck pulled up, Richard tried one final manipulation. Your mother would be ashamed, he told me. She wanted us to be a family. She did, I agreed. But you never wanted that. You wanted a free place to live and a woman to raise your kids every other weekend. You got 21 years of that. Be grateful. I gave you a home, he insisted. No, I said firmly. My mother gave me a home. My grandparents gave me a home. You were just a guest who overstayed his welcome. As they loaded the last box, Brian couldn't resist a parting shot. You'll be alone in this big house. No real family, no one who actually cares about you. Just you and your precious inheritance. I thought about that as I watched them drive away. Was I alone? Maybe. But I was alone in my home, surrounded by 3 generations of actual family memories. The walls held pictures of my grandparents, my parents, my mother and me through the years. This house had been filled with love long before Richard arrived and would continue to hold that love long after he left. That evening, I sat in my mother's study, her presence still tangible in every carefully arranged book, every treasured photograph. I'd kept my promise to her. The house would stay in the family, the real family, the one built on love and memories, not just DNA. I found a letter she'd left for me in her desk, one I hadn't discovered during those awful weeks. Her handwriting was shaky but clear. My dearest Michael, if you're reading this, then I'm gone and you're probably dealing with Richard's nonsense. I'm sorry for that. I stayed with him longer than I should have because I wanted you to have a father. I realize now that you can't force someone to be what they're not. This house is yours, my love. It's been yours since the day you were born. Don't let anyone make you feel guilty for claiming your birthright. Blood doesn't make family, love does. And you, my son, have been loved in these walls for every day of your life. Take care of our home. Fill it with your own family someday, whether that's a spouse, children, friends, or just a lot of rescue dogs. Fill it with love and laughter like my parents did, like I tried to do. And remember, you were never not real family. You were the most real thing in my life. All my love, Mom. I pressed the letter to my chest and cried. For her, for the family I'd never really had with Richard, for the family I'd always had with her. 2 months later, I was repainting the kitchen when Mrs. Patterson stopped by with cookies and news. Richard was living in a small apartment across town, already behind on rent. Brian and Jennifer rarely visited, too busy with their own lives to care for the man who'd taught them that only real family mattered. Funny how that works, Mrs. Patterson mused. He pushed away the son who would have cared for him in favor of the real children who can't be bothered. I thought about that a lot. Richard had spent 21 years distinguishing between real family and me. In the end, his real family treated him exactly the way he'd taught them to treat family that wasn't real enough, as optional, disposable, only worth maintaining when there was something to gain. As I write this, it's been 4 months since the locks changed, since Richard tried to claim what was never his. The house is quiet but not empty. I've started hosting Sunday dinners for friends who've become my chosen family. Mrs. Patterson comes sometimes, along with other neighbors who remember my mother fondly. Last week, I got a text from Jennifer. She needed a place to stay, she'd lost her job and her roommate had kicked her out. Could she crash in one of the spare bedrooms, just temporarily? After all, we were family, weren't we? I thought about it for a long moment. Then I texted back, I'm sorry, but I only have room for real family. She didn't respond. Somehow, I think my mother would have approved. The house stands strong, as it has for 60 years. It's still in the family, the real family, the one built on love, memories, and promises kept. Richard was wrong about one thing. I'm not alone. I'm surrounded by 3 generations of love, and that's more real than blood could ever be.